Order this regularly scheduled meeting of the Community Development Committee of the Metropolitan Council. I feel like with being so dark, I should say good evening rather than this afternoon. Good evening. I'm Chair Robert Lilligren, joined by a quorum of the committee. And we have a guest recording secretary today, and Becky here. Michelle is on a break, so welcome, Becky. Thanks for filling in. And Michelle told me before this break, this is the first committee meeting in her Met Council career that she's ever missed.
Wow. Thank you. It's not because
Go.
I kept her here. I wanted her.
Right, ease up. So first on the agenda is the approval of the agenda, and if committee members don't have any additions, corrections, or changes, we can consider it approved. All right, we have an approved agenda. Next is approval of the minutes of the Community Development Committee of October 17th, 2022. Those were posted in advance of the meeting, and I would entertain a motion to approve. Thank you, Councilmember. Is there a second?
Second.
Great. Additions, corrections, discussion? I thought you were going to raise your hand to say something.
No, I was pointing at who was the second because I
Thank
saw
you.
Becky looking up.
Thanks. Seeing no discussion, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Move on to our one consent agenda item. Is there a motion to approve? Thank you. Is there Councilmember Bento? Is there a second?
Second.
Councilmember Wolf, thank you. Any discussion on the consent agenda? Hearing none. Oh,
Mr.
Councilmember
Chair.
Bento, yeah.
This isn't discussion, but this is just something I want to insert, and this is also in addition to the first item under the non-consent agenda. The Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission heard presentations from both Chee and Jessica regarding these issues at their last meeting, and I just want to commend Jessica and Chee, as well as the whole staff team that work with and for MPOSC. They do such a great job of putting together their presentations. And I also want to note that the MPOSC commissioners are very focused on their work. They do their homework prior to the meeting. They ask great questions and get into great discussions during the meeting. And I just wanted that to be an official part of the record because we so quickly go through these items.
Great.
Those efforts are oftentimes not noted. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. I think we'd all agree, so thank you so much. Any further discussion on the consent agenda? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. We'll move on to our non-consent business items, the first one being 2022-285. It's the same week item. It's the Vermillion Highlands Greenway Regional Trail Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund and from Dakota County. And Ms. Lee, Jessica Lee is here to present. Ms. Lee, welcome.
Thank you, Chair and Council members. My name is Jessica Lee. I'm a Senior Parks Planner at the Council, and I'm here to present business item 2022-285, Vermillion Highlands Greenway Regional Trail Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund Award, the McMenomy property for Dakota County. It's been a while since I've been here. Do I ask for the slides too?
No, you can, oh.
I don't see a clicker. Oh. Maybe this is it. That's the one. All right. Thanks. Sorry about that. The Vermillion Highlands Greenway Regional Trail is located in the center of Dakota County. It starts up near Lebanon Hills Regional Park and will connect to Whitetail Woods Regional Park, as well as the Vermillion River Aquatic Management Area and Wildlife Area. The McMenomy property is located in the northern segment of the Vermillion River Greenway. The map on the left shows segment 1 of this trail, with the McMenomy property circled in red. Dakota County is proposing to purchase a 5.7-acre easement on this property for the trail corridor. The easement location is shown in the image on the right. This property is mostly wooded with adjacent wetlands. The 5.7-acre trail easement was appraised at $235,000, and the landowner has agreed to an amount of $246,848. This amount is well within the allowed 110% limit. With a total acquisition cost of $250,480, the grant amount would be $187,860, and the Dakota County local match would be $62,620. Our rationale for recommendation is that this acquisition is consistent with the 2040 Regional Parks Policy Plan, the Parks and Trails Legacy Fund, the Vermillion Highlands Greenway Regional Trail Master Plan, and Dakota County is within its $1.7 million per fiscal year limit for the Parks and Trails Legacy Fund Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund. And our recommendation is that the Metropolitan Council approve a grant of up to $187,860 to Dakota County to acquire a 5.72 acre easement on the McMenomy property located at 120th Street West in Rosemount for Vermillion Highlands Greenway Regional Trail. And thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lee, for the report and for your work on this. And before I ask committee members if they have questions, I just have one quick question. Can you please explain why this is a same week item?
Oh, sure, certainly, Chair, council members. The county needed to close on this acquisition by the end of the month.
Okay,
And with the holiday, we weren't sure about the timing
Okay.
of the third meeting, and so we put it together quickly so they could acquire it.
thank you. Good work. I'm glad we can accommodate them. Questions on that report, committee members? Any questions? Hearing none, Ms. Lee has recommended an action that the Metropolitan Council approve the grant of up to $187,860 to Dakota County to acquire the McMenomy site. Is there a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Thank you, Councilmember Wolf. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Cummings. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion. Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will move on to our second non-consent business item. It's 2022-288. It's the adoption of payment standards of the Metro AHRA Rent Assistance Program. Ms. Smith is here to present, and before we do, we've been discussing this for quite a while. I just really want to commend Ms. Smith and her team for not just the hard work they do in this very technical and complicated area, but for actually teeing it up and engaging this committee and council members, I think, in a really, really effective and fruitful way. These are difficult decisions. We're really having to balance values here, and I, for one, appreciate the way that we've been engaged. So thank you for being here, Ms. Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening. For the record, I'm Terri Smith. I'm the Director of the Council's Housing and Redevelopment Authority. Happy to be here to present two items to you. First one is on the payment standards for Metro HRA rent assistance programs. So just a little bit of a review. I won't have as many slides as I did a couple of weeks ago when we talked about all this, but just to yeah, right? Don't want to repeat everything, right? Payment standards, as you recall, they're rent limits used in the administration of the Section 8 and other rent assistance programs administered by the Metro HRA. It's really the shopping amount that voucher holders have when they're out shopping for a rental unit. Our friends at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development issue fair market rents once a year around October 1st. Once those are issued, housing authorities are charged with adopting payment standards between 90 and 110% of those fair market rents. Our goal is always to have payment standards high enough to serve so that voucher holders can be successful in placing their voucher in a unit of their choice, but then low enough to serve as many families as possible. You will also recall that we adopted small area fair market rents in July 2020, and that's the recommendation this year as well. And those are rent limits at the zip code level instead of one fair market rent for the entire region. Thrive gives us some policy direction in adopting rent limits. Essentially, the Thrive direction is to adopt payment standards that are high enough to ensure that voucher holders can access any neighborhood of their choice, we offer housing options that meet the needs of all people in the region, and then there's further direction in the council's housing goal related to this. You've seen this chart numerous times, but just to balance us, HUD says, okay, Metro HRA, Met Council, here's your money, now go out and serve as many families as you can with it. If we're issuing all vouchers, we can issue 6,997 vouchers. Today, our budget for this year is $76 million. We're hoping to get a few, $2.5 million more by the end of the year, but we haven't heard. But that should allow us to serve all voucher holders this year. But as we're looking to payment standards for next year, of course, higher rent limits means our average subsidy payment goes up. It also means that fewer vouchers could be issued, but then that we are hopeful that voucher holders will have success placing their voucher, resulting in a higher success rate. If we have lower standards, then lower average subsidy, we could potentially serve more voucher holders, but then voucher holders may experience challenges placing their voucher in a unit of their choice. When we're looking at reviewing payment standards, these are all of the things that we look at, and we had several slides at this regarding these items at the information item a few weeks ago. But vacancy rates, tenant rent burden, so the number and percentage of voucher holders that are paying more than 30% of their income towards rent. We're looking at average rents by community and bedroom size, and those things all sort of come down to our recommendation of payment standards for the coming year. Our data review, Joel, I want to give a shout out to our colleagues in research again, because we're lucky at the Metropolitan Council that we have this amazing, smart research team. Most housing authorities across the country don't have that. I was just telling Angela, I have a tickle in my throat today for some reason. I feel fine, but they help us dig into this, and so I'm thankful for their help and their expertise and their data. I also want to give a shout out to Steve Victory, who's the HRA Business Systems Analyst. He creates amazing tools that our colleagues at other housing authorities drool over to help us look at this stuff, so I'm thankful for them. But rents continue to rise faster than inflation for some rental units. Vacancy rates remain very low for some rental units. And particularly the units that are typically rented by voucher holders. The adoption of small area fair market rents has really made an impact and increased housing choice among voucher holders, so that's important to state. Rent burden of current program participants is higher than we want it to be, and so adopting new payment standards will allow that to come down. And then some changes must be made to remain compliant with the federal program rules. So we are required to change at least 79 zip codes and increase those standards to get our payment standards within the range. In terms of rent, you'll recall that tenants pay between 30 and 40% of their income towards rent. If they find a unit within the payment standard, they're paying 30%. And so we want to get that rent burden down so that as many of our families as possible are paying 30% of their income towards rent. So these are the three options that I talked to you all about a few weeks ago. Option one was to make minimal changes to the payment standards to get us within the required range. This would result in changes to 76 zip codes, but still a high percentage of rent burden even after making those required changes. Option two was a scenario where we talked about adjusting the small area fair market rents to 95%. I think the biggest issue with that, and concurred or agreed to by many of you at the last committee meeting, was that the rent burden for existing voucher holders remained quite high under that option. And the option we seemed to land on at our last committee meeting, or at least the takeaways I had, were to adjust all of the payment standards to 100% of the current small area fair market rents. So although that has a hefty price tag, it would allow us to bring success to voucher holders that are looking for rental units. And it would be sort of a re-benchmarking, so re-leveling the playing field. So this is the recommendation that I'm making to you all today, is to adjust all of the payment standards to 100% of the new small area fair market rents. This results in an increase to 117 zip codes across the region, decreasing 0 zip codes. So I think that tells us a lot of what's happening in the rental market. Rents are still going up. Our current rent burden is 48% of voucher holders are paying more than 30% of their income towards rent. That's too high. We want to get that down. And once we fully implement these new payment standards, and this makes some assumptions that nobody moves, nobody's rent changes, and we know that's not going to be the case, but assuming what we know today, it could bring future rent burden down to only 20% of the voucher holders paying more than 30% of their income towards rent. And then it's within the goal range. And then the implementation costs. It costs a lot to implement this. So it could, when fully implemented, it could cost an additional $5.1 million. And that, again, assumes nobody moves, nobody's rent changes, et cetera, and we know that's not going to happen. I would say this is the worst case scenario, that we could see a reduction to 400, or reduction in service to 450 families. But again, the only, how I get to that number is I just take our average cost by the 5.1 million. So it's worst case scenario. It's not going to happen that way. We know our federal income is gonna go up some next year, particularly if we get that additional 2.5 million that I talked about, we'll get that back next year, and there will be some inflation. So HUD will look at our current costs when they're allocating our budget for next year. So that's a worst-case scenario, and know that HRA staff, we work closely with our budget partners, both in CD Finance, MTS, and then Finance and Regional Administration to monitor our budget very, very closely and sort of know month by month and sort of look at what we're looking at. Also, to be clear, this reduction doesn't mean 450 families are going to lose their voucher tomorrow. We would, these will be implemented for next year, and then we would reduce our program size through attrition as, you know, month by month. But it's not going to be this bad. It's just worst-case scenario.
Councilmember Wolf, questions?
Thank you. That also assumes that nobody's income goes up, and like we see Social Security is going up significantly, and a lot of the lower end of the job market has had significant increases in order to keep people coming to work. So, yay, that's more chance that it won't be
But it wouldn't be as
5.1
bad.
million.
It's up to us.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Wolf, good point. Yeah, it makes those assumptions.
Yep, further questions, Councilmember Johnson?
And Terry, you might have covered this in past presentations, but how much time do you think will be reduced for that voucher holder as they're trying to find a place? I mean, do we have any idea of, you know, maybe they were looking 4 or 5 months or couldn't even find something in 6 months? Do we know, getting to this level, how the time is impacted for their search?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Johnson, we know we issue vouchers for 120 days, so that's discretionary policy that you all adopted in our administrative plan. Most housing authorities issue anywhere from 60 to 120 days. People can also request a 60-day extension if they're a person living with disabilities. Our average placement time for a voucher holder is 55 days. So that's the average when someone's issued a voucher, new coming off the waiting list, it takes an average of 55 days to place their voucher. What's the more tough part to answer is we know that people have higher barriers in their background, take a longer time to place their voucher because it takes them longer to find a landlord, for example, that's willing to rent to them. And so we don't really know what our prediction and success rate will increase to. We just know that it will increase, and we hope that that shopping time gets reduced. We just don't have any reliable data to know exactly what that looks like.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions at this point? Hearing none, Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So upcoming dates, November 7th, today, we have our CDC action. We're going to the council on November 23rd for full council action. And then these, if they pass, the new payment standards will be implemented in February or March at that time. And then we'll go through the same cycle again next fall.
Mr. Chair,
Director Roz, yeah.
just a minor correction on Terry's slide, November 30th would be that meeting. You might recall, council members,
right.
November 23rd is canceled. Yep, and our November 30th is the special meeting, which is why the last action business item that Jessica brought is also a same week because we can't go on the 23rd.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Director Bras.
Thank you, Ms. Smith, for the report and for all the work, and to your team as well. Questions or discussion on this report? Councilmember Wolf.
I would just, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just comment that I feel pretty good about this. I've been through a lot of these adjustments over the years where we talk about how many vouchers we might not be able to serve if we run short. And the climate right now seems better in terms of the federal government making up whatever shortfalls there are than we had in the past. So I fully support the 100% re-benchmarking, and I would move approval.
Thank you. Councilmember Wolf has moved approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Great. Councilmember Chambas has seconded. Discussion on the motion? Yeah, Councilmember Chambas.
Just want to say that I think it's great that we have an opportunity to do this type of benchmarking, and that the committee, I'm anticipating, is pretty much in agreement. This helps with housing stability, and that's really important as we see, you know, homelessness increasing, and when you see people with 48% rent burden, And we know that through our research and our study, and we can make an impact. This is a huge thing, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a comment, really. You know, Terry, you take and your staff takes so much information and distill it, and it's always a balancing act. And I think everyone here would say, we want to have affordable, stable, safe housing for everyone. And that's an impossibility, but we can still keep working toward it. But the way you present the options, and you clearly, you know, have struggled and looked at every kind of option and the cost to the council and the cost to the public and so forth, and the information that you provide really is, makes it easier to vote for what you bring to us. And I just really appreciate the way that you present it and the information that you all collect and distill and are able to then pass along to us so we can make the best decision, which is never going to be what we would all vote for if we had the magic wand, but we don't. So anyway, just thank you and your staff for all that you do. This looks like the best option possible.
Thank you. Further discussion? Yeah. Ms. Smith, I would just really support what my colleagues have said up here, and you know, these aren't easy decisions. We're kind of balancing our values here, but I think really the overarching, for me, the overarching value of offering voucher holders as much choice as where they live, I think is key and very consistent with how this council has operated in the past. And the other is the change in the rent burden. And I'm very supportive of adjusting 100% to the small area fair market rent. That burden part, one of the challenges in HUD voucher programs or HUD in general is that they can really hold people in poverty. And that rent burden is what does that. And so I think, yes, there may be risks to being able to serve fewer households depending on what the federal government does, but just easing the burden on the households that we are serving, I think, is really, really key. It gives people more options, the stability that Councilmember Chambliss was talking about, but also more options with what to do with the rest of their household income. So I'm very supportive of the motion and the recommendation and grateful for your work. Any further discussion on the motion? Further discussion? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you. Congratulations, Ms. Smith and all of us. The next item, as Ms. Smith says, well, it's item 2022-289. It's adoption of the utility allowance schedule for Metro HRA rent assistance programs. Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and council members. So this item is for the adoption of new utility allowance schedule for the administration of the Section 8 and other rent assistance programs. And it sort of links in with the payment standards. We don't have as much discretion on this one, but it certainly is a financial impact as well. I was not before you last year on this item because we didn't have any changes to make because there was no one utility that cumulatively had changed enough to require a change. So this is the first time you've seen me since 2019 on this item. So utility allowance is really a credit for tenant-paid utilities. It's provided utilities that are considered essential for a housing unit listed there, but heat, electric, cooking, water heating, et cetera. The rates are based on typical costs for an energy-conservative household. It's based on average consumption, so we collect average consumption data from utility companies, and we update that information once per year. And again, want to give a shout out and credit to our Business Systems Analyst 3, Steve Victory. We couldn't do our work without him, and he completed this thorough analysis. So Steve, thank you. So the utility allowance schedule is required by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. It's used to calculate total tenant payment for voucher holders. So total tenant payment is the rent to owner plus the utilities that are paid by the tenant. So allowances must be established and reviewed each year to see if the rates are going up and down. And they must be revised if there's a change of 10% or more in any one utility since the last time it was changed. So it's a cumulative up to the 10%. So total tenant payments, so this assumes that a tenant is paying 30% of their income towards rent. And their total tenant payments, their total contribution towards their housing costs, which includes tenant-paid utilities. Tenant rent to owner, this slide gets kind of wordy, but tenant rent to owner is tenants 30% of their income, and this is again assuming they rent a unit within the payment standard. And then we subtract out the utility allowances, so the utilities that they pay directly to the utility company. And then the HRA's portion of rent is whatever the contract rent is that the landlord is charging minus the tenant portion equals the Metro HRA portion. To sort of show an example of that, let's say there's a single person living in a one-bedroom apartment. Let's say the rent for that apartment is $1,000, so this is the amount on the lease. The lease also requires that the tenant pays for electricity for lights and cooking. And if you look at the utility allowance chart, that amount is $50. So the gross rent for this unit is $1,050 per month. Let's say in this example, the tenant's income is $1,300 a month. 30% of that is $390, so that's that tenant's total tenant payment. But then we're gonna minus out the utility allowance because a tenant needs to get a credit for those utilities that they will pay directly to the utility companies. So in this case, the tenant will pay the landlord $340 a month, and then the HRA will pay the balance of the contract rent to the landlord of $660 in this example. This is real busy, so I'm not expecting you to read this chart. My point in putting this chart in here is just so you can see the sort of the collective impact, but particularly the column on the far right, where a particular utility requires an update because that particular utility has increased 10% or more since the last update. And so 9 out of 14 utilities have increased. And particularly want to draw your attention to the top 2, so natural gas and electricity. Neither one of those utilities has been updated since 2016, so that is resulting in quite a large increase this year. So 47% for the natural gas and 10% for electricity is what that says.
Yes.
10%, yes. And so cumulatively, you know, it's a lot. But on the next screen, I will show you.
I'm sorry, before you go on to the next screen, I think we have a question from
I have a
Councilmember.
comment before you leave this
Yes.
screen, so you don't have to come back to it later.
Sure.
This is not normal. I mean, I've been here a long time, and a lot of years we've had no changes, or we've had 1 or 2 that we had to do. This is not normal, and it shows how much inflation is impacting people right now, and particularly people at the bottom of the income levels are struggling mightily with paying utilities.
Thank you. Further discussion here, Councilmember Johnson, then Councilmember Vento.
Thank you for that question, because it helps me with my question. So with, just for example, the natural gas going up 47.9, is that 47.9 since our last update in 2016? Okay, and what is the trigger then to, again, have us, we haven't revised utility rates since when, 16? Is that what the,
Ms. Smith?
Oh, no, there's a list on there. Some of them are in 20. some
okay,
are-
so it varies.
Years.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, we do this review every year, but we only make a change if there was a 10% or more change, increase or decrease since the last time that utility was changed. So for natural gas, the last time we made a change was 2016, and when we reviewed it every year since then, it didn't hit that 10% mark, so we didn't make a change. Now, I think part of, I maybe can see where you're going with this. I think there could be something with timing on when we do our review, which is about in August of every year. So it could be the last, when we reviewed it last year, maybe the utilities really started to increase a lot after that, and we just didn't catch it. So we're playing catch up now when we did our review in August of this year.
And Mr. Chair, one follow-up, thank you, because that does help me. And then is the 47.9 then, since the last time we did the review, or is that the cumulative? We catch back up then going back to 2016? I think that's what I was trying to fathom.
Ms. Smith?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Johnson, yes, the second one. So that's the total increase since the last time we changed that utility.
Okay, thank you.
Big increase this last year.
True. Thank you. Further discussion or questions, Councilmember Vento?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a really weird question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I occasionally will get inserts in a couple of different utilities offering me the opportunity to contribute toward people in need, you know, helping them. How does that show up? Do you know, Terry? Does that, I mean, I'm curious as to how they do that.
Ms. Smith?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Vento, there are some utility assistance programs out there for folks that have low incomes. And
Okay.
so certainly voucher holders are part of that program. Many are probably part of that program. We don't track that. It's
Okay.
not impacted in the total tenant calculation. So if a tenant gets utility assistance, they get that assistance and there's no penalty from our perspective in the
Great.
rent calculation pieces.
Excellent. I have one more question. When I can't sleep, and lately that's been a lot, I turn on my phone and I look at real estate listings. And I frequently see with condominiums and apartments that internet is part of the association fee or part of the fee structure. Do we have any affordable housing units that we're aware of that provide that internet service? I'm thinking especially of residents who may be working from home, and especially kids during COVID and whatever may come in the future in terms of learning from home. That access to the internet is so important, and I'm just curious as to whether or not we have any kind of a grasp as to how available that is as a utility.
Ms. Smith?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Vento, it's not something we track because it's not part of the federal formula.
Okay.
I do know there are many, many, many large complexes that have internet either as part of the lease or as an additional cost to the lease. So if there's an additional cost to the lease, the housing authority would treat it like any other optional service, like a garage.
Okay.
A resident can, potentially rent a garage as part of their lease, but it doesn't become part of the rent calculation. It's just a cost that they pay on the side to the landlord, and internet would be, work similarly to that.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Smith, that's really interesting, Councilmember Vento. I'm just wondering, we have our list of utilities here, right? Has there ever been discussion, or has HUD ever indicated, or is that some authority that we may have in the region to start to consider internet or Wi-Fi as a utility, and just to start to address the digital divide in this way?
Mr. Chair, it's a really good question, and I'm glad you raised it. I haven't heard of any discussions at the federal level about that. I think we would not have the discretion to adopt that on our own, but one of the things, if we were ever to get moving to work status, that we still want, we could make up our own rules such as that. We could give a credit for internet. And I do agree with your assessment that it, particularly when people are working from home, children are learning from home, it makes an impact and something that becomes more necessary for families.
Thank you. Councilmember Vento?
Mr. Chair, I think it's something that we need to talk about and possibly talk to Judd and the staff about that being something to pursue. I just keep thinking that HUD needs to kind of get up to speed. Aren't I bossy? And it just kind of goes back to that harangue I gave a couple meetings ago about trying to get all the levels of government to work together. We've learned a lot since COVID, and if we don't take the lessons we've learned and apply them, and then I'd like those HUD folks to come spend the winter here without a garage. I'm done, sorry.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Wolf?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There is currently a federal program subsidizing internet for low-income families, all low-income families, not just people who have Section 8.
Right, and I'm familiar with that, but it's only a portion of it. And given the rising costs of all of the technology and the internet service, I'm worried about whether or not it's enough. So, sorry, I didn't get
Thank you.
attention, I just
That's all
piped
right.
up.
Further discussion at this point? Hearing none. Ms. Smith?
Okay, so financial impact, in terms of the financial impact to the tenant, but also to the Metro HRA. We currently have 94% of our voucher holders that are paying for their own electricity, and that's electricity for cooking and lights. And then we have 47% of our voucher holders that pay for natural gas heat. So those are the biggest contributors to the financial bottom line. But you probably already know this, but higher utility allowance means the tenant rent is lower because they're getting that credit for the tenant-paid utilities, and that results in a higher HRA portion of the rent. So there is a budget impact of this, and although we don't really have discretion on whether to increase the utilities, the reality is it's costing tenants more, and we need to give them a higher credit. But the total budget impact is $161,000 for a month, and that equates to $1.9 million each year. And that again assumes nobody moves, nobody's rent changes, nobody's utilities change, and we know that's not going to be the case. And so there could be an impact to the number of families served, just like with the payment standards. 1.9 million is enough to serve about 165 families. But again, we hope to see some of these things balance out, increase federal funding, and just once again, we'll continue to watch the budget and the costs each year to make sure we remain within the budget. The chart at the right shows you the financial impact to the tenant and the number of, voucher holders. So, for example, I can't even see that. 1,484 voucher holders will see an increase in their utility allowance between $1 and $9. So you can follow that chart there to see the number of families that are impacted. So that means the tenant rent portion will go down by $1 to $9, and the housing authority payment will go up by $1 to $9. And you can follow that chart down. So the biggest impact is that third column, where people will see an increase between $20 and $39, and then an increase in HRA portion by that same amount. And so, Mr. Chair and committee members, the proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council approve the attached utility allowance for use in the Housing Choice Voucher and other rent assistance programs effective January 1st, 2023. We put that date in there, but these changes will be implemented at the same time the payment standards will be implemented upon a regular recertification, family's annual recertification. And I'm happy to answer questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. And thanks to your team for working on this. Further questions or discussion on the part? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you remind me, when did you say you expect to hear from HUD?
Ms. Smith.
Mr. Chair, council member clarification from HUD on.
Whether we're getting additional funding and.
Ms. Smith.
Mr. Chair, council member Cummings. So the federal budget has not been passed yet, so the federal fiscal year started October 1st, as you know. There's no budget passed yet. We're operating under a continuing resolution. Last year, we didn't find out until May what our funding for this year was, or this year in 2022. So we generally don't have a timely budget number from HUD. So we make a lot of assumptions, and we predict because we know next year's funding is based on this year's spending plus a little inflation. So it's kind of a guessing game, but I feel like we've been doing it long enough that our guesses are pretty good. I don't know if we've ever, at least that I can remember, had a budget on time before the year started.
Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you. A follow-up that may be really a stupid question, but do you think that the election will have any impact on the outcome?
Mr. Chair and Council Member Cummings, absolutely, because Congress decides how much money we get. And so, yes, depending on what happens in the election, that can certainly have an impact. I'll give you an example, Mr. Chair and council members. The special purpose vouchers that we've received over the last couple of years, mainstream emergency housing vouchers, family unification vouchers, we just got some general purpose vouchers. That has not happened in the last 20 years. So we've received more new vouchers in the last 4 years than we have in many, many years. So, and that can change.
Thank you. Thanks. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Xcel Energy has its rate case before the PUC now, and I'm just catching up on where they're at. They're doing public comment. They should know by June. It's a 20% proposed rate increase, and I guess the interim rate increase is just over 6%. Do we, as a body, ever submit comments on the impacts to the people that we're trying to support and keep in place in these types of situations? I mean, I don't know how much it would hold weight, but, it's clearly something that, 20% in 1 year is really gonna light this up next year when we do this again. So I just didn't know if we ever submitted comment before.
Ms. Smith, do you have a response? or-
Well, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Johnson, I'm not aware of any comments submitted for that purpose, but maybe Director Barajas does from ES or other divisions.
Dr. Rojas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Council members, certainly I know in Environmental Services and Metro Transit, we've coordinated comments to submit to POC as it relates to the energy use that we have and various other energy-related things as a large energy consumer ourselves. We have spoken in the past more informally, not informal comments about the cost to low-income households in general, and oftentimes the energy providers say, well, that's what our assistance programs are for, which don't make up the gap by any means, or still hit the pocketbook really hard on those lower income households. But certainly it's something we could consider submitting formal comments on in the upcoming docket.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Councilmember
Not to
Johnson?
overburden staff, but I just think that because, we are working with a number of people on assistance and looking at these numbers, again, I mean, the market has to work, utilities got a lot going on, but I think that it's just, we have a voice and we represent a lot of people being impacted. So something, even a short, brief statement with either anecdotal or some data behind it would be, I think at least it puts us on the record for just saying what the impact would be to the decision makers.
And to the people that were surveyed. I think that's an excellent point, Councilmember Johnson. We're the largest HRA in the state, is that right? Right. So,
Mr. Chair, yeah. Well, largest administrator of the housing voucher program. Minneapolis and
thanks.
St. Paul serve more families because they also have public housing.
okay, thank you. Thanks for that clarification. So, I mean, to your point, Councilmember Johnson, I think our statements would matter, right? They would carry some weight to some things. Further discussion on the report? Any further discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Smith proposes that the Metropolitan Council approve the attached utility allowance schedule. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Thank you, Councilmember Wolf. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion. Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you very much. That's quite a bit of business done there.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. Our final non-consent business item is 2022-290. It's the administrative review guidelines, and Angela Torres is here to present. Ms. Torres, welcome.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. I'm Angela Torres, Senior Manager of Local Planning Assistance. Today, I'd like to continue the conversation that we started on October 3rd at the CDC meeting and ask for your consideration of an update to the Council's Comprehensive Plan Amendment Administrative Review Guidelines. Just a brief touching on the background information that I shared with you before. As you might remember, the current administrative review guidelines have been in place since 2010, although they were some form of guidelines have been in place since 1987. Administrative reviews are conducted by council staff with the delegated authority granted by the council, meaning that committee review and further the full council review is not required. Just regarding the process itself, this is viewed as an expedited review process, which is generally completed within 15 business days, which is much shorter than the possible 60 to 120 days scheduling that may happen when the full council reviews an amendment. Administrative reviews are required to meet all adopted criteria for eligibility, and the changes proposed are proposed to help with clarity and transparency for both council staff and local governments, to continue improving the council's administrative processes, and to provide high levels of service to our local government partners. At the October 3rd CDC meeting, the committee reviewed the administrative guidelines as an informational item, as I mentioned. During that discussion, committee members suggested that current eligibility could be expanded so that more amendments are able to be reviewed administratively. So staff propose an additional change to accomplish this. We know already that 72% of amendments to the 2040 plans, which were submitted between October of 2019 and July of 2022, So council reviewed 61 amendments that were determined ineligible for admin review, and of those 61, nearly half were reviewed by the council solely because of the criterion on the net change to housing units, which is currently at 100 units. If the threshold were raised from 100 units to 250 units, 23 more amendments would have been eligible for administrative review, and that is the biggest bulk of the kinds of amendments where there weren't multiple policy issues or multiple reasons as to why amendments may come before the committee for review. So knowing that, then this change would have facilitated an administrative review of 82% of the total 217 amendments to 2040 plans that we've analyzed. I mentioned before that clarity and transparency were the primary drivers of the proposed updates. As described in the staff report, most changes to the guidelines are minor clarifications, which help both staff and local governments better understand how determinations are made, clarifying current practice, as well as methods of calculation when those are necessary. The primary change proposed, as described in the previous slide, is to raise the eligibility threshold for the net change to housing units from 100 to 250 units. This is criterion 8 in the administrative review guidelines, and the revised language shown here includes the increase to 250 units. As described in the rationale in the staff report, staff find that the proposed amendment supports a transparent review process, ensures consistent application of guidelines, removes minor redundancies and improves clarity, improves a shared understanding of eligibility determinations, and improves customer service. The proposed action in front of you today is that the Metropolitan Council revise the Council's Comprehensive Plan Administrative Review Guidelines as shown in Attachment 1 of the staff report. And with that, then I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Torres. Questions or discussion on that report? Councilmember Chambliss, then Councilmember Johnson.
Yes, so could you elaborate a little bit, Chair and Ms. Riley? Torres, I'm sorry. The increase in customer service, what are the increased customer service benefits?
Ms. Torres.
Chair and committee member Chambliss, one of the things that local governments ask us for continuously is more expedited review, additional efficiencies to administrative process. So we try to analyze and review those on occasion, and anytime we can shorten any of our review timelines, local governments are highly appreciative.
Hey, Chair, one more question, just to make sure I'm clear on the proposed land use change from 100 to 250 housing units. So what does that do to the density percentage that is required in comprehensive plans? Right now, you know, I think the average is somewhere, what, 4 or 5% density, if I'm correct?
Ms. Torres?
Chair and committee member Chambliss, the administrative review guidelines are specifically for a criteria where we can review things by staff rather than spending the time and effort to come before the committee. It doesn't impact the requirements for minimum density throughout the region. Those are adopted as part of Thrive.
Okay, good. I'm relieved. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Johnson, then Councilmember Vento.
Thank you,
Councilmember
Mr. Chair. And it's, you could be increasing your density by over 100. So now 250 is the threshold. So it could be reducing or increasing, so it can go either way. And then, again, it's just a straight number. It's not a units per acre formula. It could be a small parcel, and we're still doing 250, or it could be a massive piece of property. So we didn't want to do any kind of ratio based on available land or anything like that. I guess not when you're going from 72 to 82. It's kind of a numbers game at that point with the amendments. Is that kind of the logic?
Ms. Torres, yeah.
Chair and committee member Johnson, correct. We're just trying to make it very simple for local governments. The more you get into some of those nuances, yes, we could look at, the floor area ratio or whatever. We're just trying to make it very simple for local governments, a reasonable threshold, which still brings critical policy issues in front of the committee, any policy inconsistencies, any large-scale changes still come before the committee for review. The committee just suggested raising the criteria for this particular item, which just captures most of the non-controversial, a rather small amount of units, so that it's easier for local governments to continue processing their developments at the local level.
And Mr. Chair, just a
Councilman
little,
Johnson.
couple more follow-ups. So again, this might be a plan that's been already approved and through the Met Council, but it's being phased, and now there's been a change, and the phase is just gonna adjust some of those units. And again, 250 then would be the threshold by which, if it was over that, it would come to us. Okay, I'm with you. And then, is there a process by which, if we said no, that they could appeal and go through the full process? Or is it just done if administratively we say no?
Thank
Chair-
you. Yeah, Ms.
Chair-
Torres.
Thank you. And Committee Member Johnson. The determinations for administrative review or not are determined at the staff level. We do still route things that we're uncomfortable with making determinations on through committee, because when all else fails, it's the council's ultimate decision on whether or not an action is taken or a policy inconsistency is considered. That being said, we typically don't see a lot of pushback on that. In particular, it's a well-known process. Anything that we can do to expand our criteria will definitely be appreciated and not controversial at all. And so we're really just trying to help local governments through their local planning process.
And again, Mr. Chair, and the city councils, though, have to approve the amendment first, and then it comes to us administratively. So it's already gone through that public process, and then it gets to you.
Right, Chair and committee members, that's true. We don't do anything except authorize. So when you're saying things like whether we say no or not, those are not kind of determinations that the council is making. Local governments can amend their plans for any number of reasons. Sometimes it's an unexpected development, sometimes it's completion of a feasibility study, or something that they had planned on phasing. And so when changes like that happen, which is very common, we want local governments to see their comprehensive plans as living documents. And so the more that we can provide flexibility for them to make those changes and make those amendments, the more it facilitates development within our local governments.
Thank you. I think this is great, because time is money, and developers are trying to get in the ground, and some of those are housing developers who, we're already pushing fees and costs and things like that, and it just increases the price. So I appreciate this. I think it's a great idea.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. I asked Director Barajas the exact same question about the recourse or the appeals process, and I got the exact same answer. So, good job. Councilmember Bento has taken herself out of queue, so I assume your questions got answered. So, further discussion, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And staff doesn't say no
Right, I'm
administratively.
sorry. I should have just ripped my tongue out after that.
Saying no is a big
Yes,
deal.
right, I
And it's
know.
been threatened a few times.
Yeah.
But generally, we work through things to get to yes or authorization. But our bar for which we could say no and send it back is a substantial departure from regional systems plans, which is a big deal. I mean, just threatening it is a big deal, and it's a hard bar to get over. So I think this is a great step forward, because like you said, time is money, and when you're a developer and you've got all your money tied up waiting to get it to a development, and then it's gonna take another 60 or however many more days for the council to say, yeah, you can do that because you're allowed to by law do that. If we can avoid that delay and be less of a burden on cities, I think that's a good thing. Like you said, it's important that we have the comp plans be living documents, because look at how much things have changed in the last 10 years. And you do that comp plan for 10 years. So making it easy as possible for cities to adjust to different conditions, you know, when you see a lessening of demand for a particular type of housing and you need to transition to something that's more in demand, we should be very supportive of that. Whether it's upzoning or downzoning, whatever the need is, we need to be able to adjust to that need. So I'm very supportive of this change.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion?
Chair, could I?
Yeah, Ms. Torres.
I just wanted to thank Councilmember Wolf. She reminded me of one other thing I wanted to mention. When we say no, it's still not really no. It's through a process called plan modification. If that comes before you, know that it is a very substantial issue. It's not something that we ever want to delve into. Councilmember Wolf is right, because she's been around for a long time, that oftentimes just talking about that is the negotiation part between local governments and local planning assistance staff, and you as council members as well are often, will definitely be involved if ever that comes before you. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Any further discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Torres has proposed that the Met Council, the action that the Met Council revise the council's comprehensive plan amendment administration review guidelines as shown in attachment 1 of the report. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Bento. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion. Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you, Ms. Torres, and for you and your team's work on this. It's always good to be improving our processes.
Thank you all.
Thank you. That concludes our business items on this agenda, and we'll move into our information items. The first is Community Development Grants Overview and Annual Impact, and Heather Giesel is here to present. Welcome. Welcome. Oh, there you are. I was looking around. I didn't see you. Okay. Welcome.
Hello, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Heather Giesel. I am the acting Director and Grants Manager for Community Development and Metropolitan Transportation Services. So I'm here today to just give you an overview of the community development grant programs and provide a look back at the impact of our grants on the region during calendar year 2021. It's my intention to bring a similar presentation to the committee each year with an annual look back at the impact of the prior year. Just to increase transparency and recognize all the hard work that's done in the region with our grant funding. So if you have any feedback on the presentation or any other information that you would like to see in future presentations, please feel free to reach out afterwards and let me know. So I'll start with a high-level overview of the cumulative impact of the CD grant programs and then move into more specific discussion about livable communities, regional parks and trails, and local planning assistance. So first up, we have the overview of this is the high level of all the community development grant programs. So there are currently approximately 425 active grants totaling $226 million, with 10 annual solicitations managed by program staff and supported by the CD grant unit staff. So staff then ensure that compliance with all federal, state, local, and council grant requirements through ongoing management and monitoring of their individual grants. So Livable Communities provides funding for communities to invest in local economic revitalization, workforce housing initiatives and development or redevelopment that connects different land uses and transportation. Opportunities are supported by the Livable Communities Act, which was adopted by the legislature back in 1995, and there are currently 76 participating communities. From 1996 through 2021, the council awarded 1,261 grants totaling over $473 million in Livable Communities funds, and they've gone on to leverage billions of dollars in private and other public investment. And here you will see a list of all the individual grant programs. So I'm just going to go through and give a little bit more information on each of these. So there have been, the lifetime impact of the grant programs include 322 LCDA grants, those are non-TOD, totaling more than $186 million for development and redevelopment projects that link housing, jobs, and services and maximize efficient infrastructure in 68 different cities. There are 99 transit-oriented development awards totaling more than $66 million. And these have been made with TBRA and LCDA funds in 15 cities. There are 595 TBRA pollution cleanup grants, investigation or pilot grants totaling more than $159 million made to 52 cities. And there have been 232 LHIA grants to 57 cities totaling over $56 million. And these provided new or rehabilitated affordable housing opportunities. And then the current grant portfolio for LCA projects is that there are approximately 150 active grants totaling $74.8 million, $21 million spent on projects with about $54 million remaining to be spent at the time of this presentation. Funding is helping to create jobs, affordable housing, and private investment in areas around the region. And then I worked with LCA program staff to identify a couple projects that they wanted to highlight. The first one was Cornerstone Village in Oakdale. I won't read through the entire thing, but just give you an idea of some of the impacts. So 71 units of 71 units with 50 affordable housing units and two living wage jobs created. And then Seaward Commons, 32 units, all of them affordable, 6 living wage jobs created, and that was in the city of Minneapolis. And then finally, Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity, which was an LHIA project through Dakota County, which preserved 10 single-family units. So next up, we have the Regional Parks and Trails. So the council administers a variety of funding sources and grant programs for the betterment of the regional park system. You can see there the list of the 10 implementing agencies for regional parks. I'm sure most of you are familiar with them. So from state fiscal year 2010 through the current fiscal year, the council has awarded over 670 grants totaling over $350 million to those 10 regional park implementing agencies. The grant programs you can see listed here: Parks and Trails Legacy Fund, Parks Acquisition Opportunity Fund, Regional Parks Bonding, Competitive Equity Grant Programs, and Operations and Maintenance. And just a little bit more information on those. So the lifetime impacts of these programs include 113 PAOF grant funds totaling more than $56 million. Examples include 80 acres for the Big Marine Park Reserve in Washington County and recent acquisitions of key segments of West Mississippi River Regional Trail, 366 Parks and Trails Legacy Fund grants totaling more than $223 million, 144 regional park bonding grants totaling more than $73 million, which has resulted in capital improvements throughout the region, including a new waterfront service area for Carver County and the development of a new winter recreation area in Ramsey County. And then our newest program, the 26 competitive equity grants totaling more than $2 million. These have included a youth employment program, accessibility improvements, learning to bike and ski programs, among other innovative equity initiatives. The current portfolio for the Parks Grant Program is approximately 200 active grant projects totaling $149 million. There's currently $47.8 million spent on projects, with about 101 remaining to be spent on those active grants. Funding is helping to improve facilities, acquire land, engage with the public, and advance equity in the regional parks and trails system. So I again worked with, you'll notice there's a typo on these. The header should say Regional Parks and Trails, so my apologies for that error. I again worked with park staff and grant staff to identify a couple of projects that the team wanted to highlight. The first one was an acquisition at Gale Woods Farm, a $460,000 award to acquire 28 acres at Gale Woods Farm. The next one was an equity grant program award that went to Dakota County. So each year for the last several years, Dakota County has used less than $100,000 of its legacy allocation for their outreach program. It's just a great example of how legacy funds can be used to connect people in the outdoors. Yeah, just really interesting work there. And then finally, we have the paddle sport rental stations at Washington County. This was part of the equity grant program to install paddle sport rental stations at Square Lake Special Recreation Feature and Cottage Grove Ravine Regional Park. And then our final area, and this is the newest area to come to the grants unit for management, is local planning assistance. So planning assistance grants are made available to assist communities with updating their local comprehensive plans. The council establishes eligibility to apply for these grants to target communities most in need of financial assistance. Grants are not competitive, and our most recent round was in 2016. There were 104 eligible communities, and grant awards ranged from $10,000 to $84,000. So the impact of those 2016 round of grants, $1.86 million was awarded. As of today, $1.81 has been paid out to 69 grantees. They went to municipalities that had a small tax base, had forecasted higher growth, or were a consortium of 5 smaller communities, enabled their staff to hire consultants and work on their plans. Only 4 communities remain to be reimbursed following their plan updates. The rest have been approved and paid out, and there are 3 more that are no longer eligible for reimbursement. And the next round, I believe, will start in so we're in the process of talking about the administrative process for the next round and what it'll look like, and eligibility criteria will be on the docket for the coming years before the next round is eligible in 2026. Okay, yep, so every 10 years. So yeah, with that. Just a reminder, if there's any other information that would be helpful to know or that you're interested in knowing, I can certainly follow up after this or put it into future presentations. So my plan is probably to come back mid-2023 with a look back at 2022 after we've had a chance to close the books and kind of know the overall financial impact over the last year or so. So if there's any questions, I can take those now.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Giesel, for the report. I look forward to seeing it. It's good to see what our investments are doing throughout the region, so very helpful. Discussion on that report, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Livable community stuff seems to kind of go in waves where things get built really well and then they get in slumps where a lot of them end up getting turned back. Are projects still going forward, or have we started to see some people say, hey, wait a minute, I'm not going to get this grant done?
Ms. Giesel.
Mr. Chair, committee members, I would say a little of all of that. Certainly some are more stalled than others, but I can certainly follow up with a more comprehensive overlook of perhaps how long it's been taking for project to get started or spent down. So I'd be happy to provide a follow-up of information on that. But
Great, thank you. Thanks. And we have seen requests for extensions that actually come through the committee as well, when they've kind of hit the end of their boundaries. So, yeah, that would be interesting information to see how we're progressing. Further questions or discussion on the report? Right, hearing none, we look forward to the report mid-year next year and how well we did, or what we did in 2022.
Thank you very
Ms.
much.
Giesel. Yeah, thank you. We'll move into our final information item, or our final item for the evening, and this will be, the staff presenter will be Director Barajas, but I thought I'd turn this over to Councilmember Lindstrom to kind of introduce this, as he's been much more involved in the point person on the council for this work. So Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I'll keep it really brief. I don't want to steal the thunder of our the community development tag team here when it comes to climate and this fantastic work plan that we have before us. I will say that thinking about clearly there's work for each division to do in the council, but there's actually, thinking about community development, there's work for each unit, whether that's community assistance, where we've seen communities ask us for assistance if they're losing ash trees and they want to know where to most strategically put their trees. We've got an app for that. Whether it is assistance on best practices around permitting for solar panels. We are already assisting communities. So the point I'm trying to make is that this is part and parcel for the work that we're already doing. Metro HRA, I'll just tell you a real quick story from a conversation I had last week. I was talking to a staff member from the city of Eden Prairie. Eden Prairie has a community center where on top of the community center, they have a community solar garden. Within that community solar garden, they have a carve-out for subscribers for low and moderate income residents, okay? They're having a challenge finding residents that meet that threshold. And so they got connected to Metro HRA. And the conversation that I had last week with the staff member from Eden Prairie was, hey, I understand you got connected to Metro HRA. Can you tell me how that's working? And she said, Steph Paulson has been fantastic to work with. It's just been fantastic. And they are reaching out to all the voucher holders that qualify for this community solar garden to encourage them to subscribe. So that's fantastic. So that's Metro HRA, they're connected to this community action plan, or it's parks, or it's data. I looked at the matrix today and did a little search for how often the word data comes up. 10 times is, out of the 60-some action plans, it's data. So it's our research unit that is really going to be called to action for this. It's livable communities. It's, we're spending millions of dollars on infrastructure, facilities that will be with us in this region for generations. So with that, hopefully I didn't steal any of your thunder. So there you go. Take it from there. And there's been a lot of great work that's been rolled up over the last year and a half or so to come to this committee today.
Thank you, Councilmember Lindstrom. So I'll turn this over to Director Barajas and Mr. Wycheck. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councilmember Lindstrom. And for the record, I'm Lisa Barajas, Executive Director of the Community Development Division, and I'm joined by Eric Wycheck, one of our project managers for the Climate Action Work Plan and a planning analyst in local planning assistance and community development. I'm just going to give a brief overview today. You will you've already heard from me before, but just a reminder of where we are, where we've been, and what's in front of you today. Today, we are focusing on the actions that community development is tasked in the matrix as a lead for, in addition to some that we are co-leads for. There are a number of actions within the matrix where we are also a participant in, especially in some of the building services. As you all remember, we also own 150 odd housing units as well. So when we talk about buildings and management of our facilities, we're also including our housing within that. We're not going to talk about those actions today. Some of those cross-divisional actions like that will be in front of Management Committee later this week. But today we'll talk about the CD-led actions.
And
So,
before you go forward, can you talk about that photograph? You didn't just pull that off of the internet, did you? I know where that photograph came from.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Lindstrom, you probably know more about it than I do, so why don't you go ahead?
That is from the Met Council's Solar for Vouchers program, which we led about a year and a half ago or so, which provided technical assistance to apartment owners in exchange for for them putting on solar on their buildings, and exchange for that technical assistance, they accepted vouchers.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lindstrom, and certainly, as you all know, the more landlords we have in our program for the Housing Authority increases potentially our success rate for placing those vouchers as well. So just a brief reminder, the purpose of our climate action work plan is really building on our existing climate work and unifying our efforts across the council. We've had a lot of work and action from staff from all across the different divisions of the council over, my goodness, the 15 years at least that I've been at the council. But we haven't had a council-wide plan for all of our work, certainly some collaborations among divisions over time. But this will be our first council-wide plan to really unify all of our work and build off what we're learning from one another in our different divisions' work, because there certainly is quite a bit that we've innovated on as well that we can certainly apply across our divisions, as well as opportunities for going further, faster together. This work also moves us forward on a pledge that we made in Thrive MSP 2040, really to become a regional leader on combating climate change ourselves, but leading by example in our own work, not just in our regional policy work, which obviously as a planner I think is very important, but walking our talk is also important. And just as a reminder, and you're all familiar with this, you've seen this slide before, but just some examples of the past climate work that we've done and current climate work, I should say as well, since a number of these tools remain available on our website and we continue to update them, or our programs that we continue to carry on. But some of the more recent ones that, as Councilmember Lindstrom referenced, the Growing Shade tool, the app that we have for that, our greenhouse gas inventory, which you'll be hearing about more later this year as well, and our zero emission bus transition plan are just some of those examples of work, but certainly there is a lot more behind this slide that I'm showing you today. As a reminder on our timeline, we're on the right-hand side of this curve here now into the Q4, transitioning from the top of the arc over into the right-hand arc there, of really reviewing all of these actions and text within the plan with you as we move toward council adoption in December. And then starting off our year with a work plan in hand in 2023 to get to implementation. This climate action work plan isn't just something we came up with on our own, but is work that is part of a conversation that our teams have been involved with, dovetailing with the state's climate action framework, which the state began developing over the last, oh my goodness, I should think 2 years now, potentially 3 years. COVID time is a bit of an accordion for me, so I don't recall all of that. But a number of our team members on our climate action work plan also participated on the sub-teams in the development of the state climate action framework, which also used considerable engagement with the public, with tribal governments, and with us amongst agencies about work that we could be doing together across the state to further get ourselves back on track towards the Next Generation Energy Act goals, as well as meet nationwide commitments and a state vision and commitment for 2050 goals toward net zero. Our climate action plan, it has a 5-year timeframe with a plan to really continue to report out on progress and action on an annual basis, as well as updating in a 3 to 5 year timeframe. What have we done? What has been successful? What hasn't been working? And what more can we be doing to further drive down our emissions and make our operations more resilient to the impacts that we're already experiencing today in the region? So as a reminder on our commitments in our council meeting, I reviewed with you in more depth the 5 commitments that you see on a single slide today, but these are at the front of the climate action work plan, and all of our actions are organized by strategies within these commitments and then actions to implement to further those strategies. So these are the 5 higher level ones. Just for your reference, today we're going to actually not talk about our actions in reference to those commitments, but we've organized them a little bit differently because in community development, our work falls in a couple of different buckets, at least in the items that we lead, and some of those might be more familiar to you. As Councilmember Lindstrom said, technical assistance and data are one of those kind of big buckets of work that CD staff are tagged as being responsible for within this. So today, like I mentioned, we're going to be focusing on that matrix column that's highlighted in green there on actions, and then the column there with the lead tag as community development, and a couple of actions that we share with environmental services to review with you today. We would love your feedback on not just the actions that we're discussing, but whether there are actions that we should be considering that may not be on this list, whether the timeframes or the prioritization, the way that we've organized things makes sense or they should be different, or if you just have questions about what the action might mean, if it's clear enough. Any question actually is very helpful, but I will turn it over to Eric, who will walk through this category of actions with you, and then we will turn to discussion.
Yes, thanks, Lisa. Just wanted to reiterate what committee member Lindstrom had mentioned, that the full plan has about 60-odd actions. And again, we're just going to focus on the community development actions here, which there are about 15 of these. We thought we didn't want to barrage you with everything right now. You should have had the list of those actions within your handout, so you can refer to those. So I'm just going to go through these. And as Director Barajas mentioned, we broke these out into buckets that make sense for community development. So these titles on these slides we're just kind of grouping these for the purpose of this presentation so that they're more understandable. So within the research and technical assistance actions, we have different priorities, and we're actually currently looking at reprioritizing based on these new definitions. So don't spend too much time in the matrix on how they're prioritized, because we have to go through those again. But what I wanted to say here is that we've got these actions that we consider high impact and low difficulty, and these are actions that focus on the incorporation of environmental justice into all climate-related tools, the utilization of council tools for capital projects and planning. So that's essentially using our own tools for our own operations and infrastructure. And then a new focus on evaluating qualitative research through storytelling and experience. So we know that our research currently focuses quite heavily on the quantitative side, so we want to incorporate more of that experiential or qualitative side within the climate research. And then moving on to some more of these research and technical assistance actions, we also have actions related to focusing on enhancing our community scale GHG inventory, providing technical assistance for electrification of city fleets, and sharing innovative climate strategies with local jurisdictions. And then finally, we have climate strategies to address current and future climate impacts on regional systems within those 2050 policy plans. And then our final focus on research is a combination action with environmental services where we would co-lead on these actions. These ones are focused on building new partnerships and utilization of our localized flooding tool to assess regional water quality. We also have an action here dedicating resources to mapping ecosystem services to provide better decision-making which links climate, water, and land use to natural resources. And then because we are community development, we do our best work usually through partnerships, whether they be with local jurisdictions, academic institutions, or the nonprofit sector. So partnerships feature quite strongly in the Climate Action Work Plan. I think you could also look up the word partnership as well as data, I think, and you'd find a lot of mentions of this. So partnerships within CD, we find that we want to pull together stakeholders to review best practices and identify gaps and therefore needs in current collaboration. So we have a lot of climate work being conducted in Minnesota, but we're not always working together. There's duplication, we can do a lot, we can go a lot further by essentially pooling our efforts, and that's not just state agencies, that's also like within the advocacy sector and within academia as well. So really being much more intentional about the partnerships so that we can do better work together. And this is something that also features quite strongly in the Minnesota Climate Action Framework. We also have an action here which focuses on new strategic partnerships to reduce energy demand in our region's affordable housing. And then finally, I'm gonna just talk about a few actions here that focus on funding. Again, we heard earlier tonight about funding activities within community development. We have within CD and at the council, we need to position ourselves competitively to obtain state and federal funding in advance to advance climate adaptation and resilience efforts. We know that there's a lot of funding that's going to be coming from the federal government on climate, and we need to make sure that our region is positioned to make sure we can get some of that funding to essentially build resilience within our region. We also have an action here to commit the council to link our climate research tools and data to our grant-making function in order to advance environmental justice outcomes. And I'm gonna pass it back to Lisa, and she'll ask you some questions about the plan.
Thanks. So as we've gone over these actions, and I hope you've had the opportunity over the last couple of weeks since we were at council discussing this, to review the plan and the actions, and certainly we'd love to hear from you on whether you have any questions, is there anything missing, or any actions that appear to be more critical to you than others that we have listed. Or do you have any questions about the capacity or resources needed to execute the actions, or really just any other questions or thoughts that you might have? We're certainly here for this discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Barajas. Questions, Councilmember, or answers, I guess, Councilmember Johnson.
Well, I have a question for you. Is, when we are looking to expand our strategic partnerships, is there a role for public or private sector in this as well? Are we working with people out in the private sector that are trying to do some of this stuff within their own organizations? Is there any crossover work there?
Mr. Chair, thank you. Mr. Chair, Council Member Johnson, there certainly is a strong business community work in this area, especially with, I think Minnesota has a circular economy group in the Twin Cities here, and through our work in the regional economic framework and with greater MSP, we have, you might recall, a new one of the 9 strategic priorities was a new climate economy, where there's a lot of business and private interest in forwarding that particular priority, where the council also in that area has said that we would like to partner and be supportive of that work.
I appreciate that, and thanks for referencing that strategic framework. I was one of the things that I mentioned when I was interviewing to be on the council is trying to, again, leverage the private sector and what they're trying to do. And, everybody's just got so much work at hand, I think, right? And so if through the Greater MSP partnership, if there's a way to let them know what we're trying to do, Certainly their board are the heads of the major organizations in the region, so it'd be nice to just push them a little bit too to see if they can meet us where we're at, if that makes sense. And then the only other question, Mr. Chair, is as it relates to the budget. We get our big budget numbers and how they come at us, and it will be interesting going forward to see what pieces of the budget maybe play into the work that we're doing here. Yes, divisionally, it could be an ES or a CD, but it'd be also nice to know how our budget is moving forward to support this type of work. It might be just in how we report it out, but I, for one, would like to just see what impacts we're having within those divisions on this work specifically.
Thank you. Director Brazos, do you have a response?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. To your point about greater MSP, it's actually very timely. I know that Chair Zelli was just presenting to them last week on the climate action framework at the state, as he is a member of the state climate subcabinet as well, and also talking about our own climate action plan and how businesses can support that work. So I think it's very timely, so I appreciate you bringing that up. And he reported back that it went very well, so I think there's a lot of energy there. And I appreciate your comment around the budget as well. I think that's certainly something I can bring back to our finance teams across our divisions work about how we are showing or telling the story about how we are using our regular council budget dollars to advance the work in this plan.
And Mr. Chair, it is coming to management in 2 days. So I'll probably ask that question again just to be on the record, but I'm fascinated with this, excited about this, and look forward to seeing some of the results. It's a huge job, but it's going to be good work, so thank you for this.
Thank you. Further discussion with Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually mentioned this to Ms. Barajas earlier because we had another meeting, but my concern with this is making sure that we do things that don't increase costs, that don't decrease the reliability of energy sources. The best social justice thing that you can do is have cheap, reliable energy so that businesses want to come here and invest, people want to come here and live and spend their money. We just saw in a previous presentation the toll that increased energy prices take on low-income people. So there's not a lot of talk about that in here. And previously, when we've talked about any of the climate stuff, it's always been, does it make sense financially? I don't want to do anything that drives up energy costs just to save carbon. Because we've seen other places do that, like Germany, and now they're cutting down their forests to keep warm because they gave up their energy independence and reliability in the name of climate. I don't want to go there because it would make us less competitive as a region without a huge global benefit. You've got to weigh the costs. And even the budget parts that you're talking about, where's that money coming from? What can we not do if we put money into something in this? Because we have a very small general fund, $18 million out of a almost $2 billion budget. I mean, it's our money that is flexible is very, very limited. And so I want to make sure we look at, if we do something climate, what are we not able to do for affordable housing or something else that is within the council's wheelhouse, because there are opportunity costs as well.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion? First, Councilmember Lindstrom, then Councilmember Chambliss. Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The good news is that oftentimes that these two things are aligned, meaning that renewable energy is becoming more often than not the cheapest form of energy. And in terms of the budget, well, first of all, an energy efficient building, that's money that you're not spending, money that you're not sending to Excel. And in terms of the budget, maybe we can think creatively about things like, if you are making energy efficient investments and therefore saving $1,000 a month on the utility bill, $50,000 a year on the utility bill, then you create your own separate fund to further invest in energy efficient or renewable type investments. So my point is there's alignment oftentimes in that you are both socially smart and financially smart.
Thank you. Councilmember Wolf? Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Vento, then Councilmember Chambliss, then Councilmember Wolf, and then Councilmember Vento. Councilmember Chambliss.
I'll defer to Councilmember Wolf, and then I can go after her.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to be clear, it's not that I don't support energy efficiency investments. The council has had a long history of those, and I fully support them when they make financial sense. But in the matrix, it doesn't talk about that piece of when it makes financial sense. And I think that's an important distinction because you can get off the rails pretty quickly if you're not looking at the financial piece of that. So I just want to make sure that we acknowledge that in what we do, as we have done in the past. It just wasn't in the document in the way that I would like to see it because it's important to keep that, the makes financial sense part, to keep us from getting out ahead of the technology and maybe investing a whole bunch in a Betamax sort of solution.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Chambliss, then Councilmember Vento.
Thank you, Chair. And just responding, the climate action work plan, that suggests that, you've already done your policy or, your high-level strategy and you're down to the work plan. That's kind of what is popping out at me here. So, having a climate action policy, I think is important and would drive the work plan. The work plan would be at a level where I think you would start talking about the finances pieces of it. But looking at climate action is something that as human beings, as people who are stewards of the earth and the climate, it should align with our values as people and good stewards. And being good stewards, we need to look at, into the future, not just the short-term benefits or the short-term costs, but the long-term benefits and the long-term costs and ramifications if we don't start highlighting climate action. And I'm happy to see that we are doing that. And I'm very pleased with everyone who has put this forward. And we have to start somewhere and start having these conversations and elevating the importance of taking climate action.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Vento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had the privilege of being a part of the work group, and I can't even begin to describe how much I learned, not only from Councilmember Lindstrom as our chair, but also the staff. I felt like I was in a college course in terms of the learning curve. But I just wanted to note that yesterday, the United Nations Climate Change Conference began in Egypt. And I think the timing of these presentations is perfect. And on October 30th, I believe it was, The Guardian had an article about the imminent crisis we face as a world. And I'd encourage you to look it up. It's an article that will probably have you, like me, looking at real estate in the middle of the night. It's pretty mind-numbing to think about. And when I think about what's happening with water levels and water quality in Minnesota, when I think about what's happening in terms of our just all the challenges we face here and throughout the nation, I don't think we have a choice as a council but to be a good role model. So I just want to really thank the staff for your great work on this. And I do want to note that at recently I was in a retail, it'll go unidentified, because it would describe a habit of mine. But, okay, it was a wine store. I overheard a conversation two women were having about that guy. I think he works at the Met Council, and he's really, really good on shade. And I knew they were talking about you, Eric. So, already you've got a reputation. Thank you.
Kind of want to know who that was.
Talking you up in the wine shop.
That's right.
Further
True confessions.
further discussion? Yeah, Councilmember Lee.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I want to thank Councilmember Lindstrom for the leadership and for inviting me to be on the work group. This is really important work. We're in, this body doesn't just steward the built environment and long-term planning, but we are stewards of the natural environment, and we are the first state that stewards the Mississippi and from the head of the country, and what we do to the river has ramifications for St. Louis, for New Orleans, and everyone else below us. And so we have to have a plan that has to make sense in it, whether it's financially or socially or any other way, because we don't really have any other choice. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Councilmember. Further discussion? I have a couple of comments, and they're sort of related, or maybe they're not, but maybe I'm just trying to relate them. But I'm impressed that commitment 1 has to do with environmental justice and incorporating environmental justice principles. And so I guess this is kind of a question, but I'm wondering how we'll see that. I mean, if we're incorporating them, it touches every other commitment, right? Every other strategy. And this may relate to the matrix, and I love the matrix. It's very complicated, but it's a lot of activity, and there's a lot going on. And to Councilmember Wolf's point, there is a field for money, finances, but it doesn't go into the analysis that I think Councilmember Wolf was trying to lift up. And so I think I'm trying to wrap up my comments about environmental justice and how it appears throughout. In a word, I would say it's like evaluation. And I don't know if the plan in the matrix is to then have that evaluation field, because it seems like since we're putting all this data into this matrix, which I think for as much data as there, it's actually fairly easy to use, so I commend you on that. But where we're gonna see that, how are we doing? Specifically, how are we doing on incorporating environmental justice principles, but really overall, how are we doing on the entire plan? And so again, I know the matrix is kind of new, but it seems like that would be the place where we could, even if it's a 1 to 5 rating system or something, just so we can be tracking our progress.
Mr. Chair, that is an excellent question, and actually we were just discussing recently with the climate action team internally about exactly that evaluation and tracking our progress. What are we going to report? How are we going to report it? How are we going to know if we're doing well or not? And certainly there are some actions that are easier to measure impact immediately. Other actions are longer term. Partners and collaborations are more qualitative. So that's part of the work that we're doing to be prepared for the implementation section and chartering a team, working with our consultant and learning from others about how we evaluate our work and how well we're doing, so that we can report that progress to you on a regular basis. But I would turn it to Eric too to talk a little more about both evaluation, but also I think the environmental justice and the work that we've done so far and how it shows up in the plan.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I appreciate you bringing that up. So environmental justice finds its way into the climate action plan in 2 ways. One of them is we actually conducted what I would call a strategic assessment of the plan itself, including the matrix. So we had a separate group called the Environmental Justice Task Force. Some of us were members on the climate action team, but some of us were not. We had that group was actually advised by an external environmental justice advisory group and also a sub-consultant with expertise in environmental justice. we created some assessment tools, and we actually reviewed the plan with those tools, and we created an internal memo which we shared to the project team, which then, in effect, changed some of the actions in the plan. Some of these changes have not been made in the matrix that you see today. We've also added environmental justice specific actions underneath the environmental justice commitment off of the back of this strategic assessment. So those will all find their way into the plan. The other side, the other part of this, which I think is almost more exciting in my view, is that outside of the strategic assessment of the plan itself, we have implementation. So a lot of the actions in the plan, we know that they could potentially have external environmental justice implications. They could be locational actions that could have an impact on a neighborhood. We've marked those different actions within the matrix as having potential environmental justice implications, which would then require an environmental justice process at the implementation, at the point of implementation. So what that looks like is going to be decided by a future environmental justice task force team that's going to create an environmental justice framework to do just that and to do a more enterprise-wide look at environmental justice. I know that's kind of a long-winded answer,
It's a good answer.
but that kind of explains the process we've gone through
I
here.
appreciate it, and we all know, and I'm sure Councilmember Vento in your gardening article, you understand that environmental impacts affect different populations differently, and so it's really affirming and rewarding, Mr. White, to hear you talk about the robust process you're using to incorporate environmental justice principles, so thank you. Well, any further discussion, questions, comments? Councilmember Lindstrom, did you want to wrap it up?
Well, I was looking at Emmett way in the back. He's stuck through an hour and 45 minutes of this meeting. Well done. But I was thinking, it's hard to think about climate without thinking about parks. And I know this is more internally focused climate action plan, and I'm sure the 10 implementing agencies, that's climate inherent to what they do. That's the biggest climate, the carbon sink, right, is that green space. Do you have any thoughts? We don't, parks doesn't show up that much in the matrix, maybe because they are more externally focused, but maybe it comes into the technical assistance, the collaboration, the partnerships, that whole aspect of it. But I don't want to stop talking about climate action without hearing from the parks folks.
Mr. Mullen, welcome.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Chair and council members. Emmett Mullen. Great question. I think this plan really looked at our internal council operations, and the park agencies, implementing agencies, are the owners and operators. But I just want to say that there is a real commitment within the 10 agencies to address impacts of climate. Eric has worked with us on a number of things in terms of understanding cooling and heat sinks, that the functions that parks can play. We also have a lot of work to do around water management. I think that's one of the 21st century issues, and it's also one of the most vexing issues that park managers face, because there are no simple solutions. So, but the park agencies are at the table, and they will continue to be, and I think through the regional development guide and our work together on that, I see that as a real launching pad for this conversation. So we aren't alone a solution to climate change, as you folks well know, but we are part of the solution, so.
Well said, thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I add as well?
Dr.
There,
Ross.
there are two actions that relate to parks, maybe in a more roundabout and indirect way, but where we have discretion, we reference one of our actions of using our tools in a